I have hauled a lot of dead things through open space, wrecked haulers, gutted mining rigs, a colony tender once, still strapped into its own launch cradle, everyone aboard long past the point where it mattered what I did with them. You get used to it. You stop expecting anything in the hull to move. The Corvessa Drift was my ship, an old tow freighter, more patchwork than plate by the time I owned her. And the job that week was a scout hull we'd found tumbling dark past the Kesserine debris line, no beacon, no registry ping, just a long cold shape on the scope that meant salvage credit if I dragged it home before anyone else claimed the coordinates. My engineer Del Mero ran the tow cables. I ran the paperwork. Neither of us thought twice about the wreck's manifest tag until we were 3 days into the haul and the dock office at Vero Station flagged the hull's registry number and told me, flat, that the ship had come out of the Halvern Reach. Everybody in this corridor knows what that means. The Reach had a contagion event 11 years back, bad enough that the compact quarantined the whole system and burned every vessel that came out of it on site. No boarding, no salvage rights, no exceptions. Any hull with a Halvern registry got a mandatory incineration order the second it touched a scanner. I'd hauled a corpse home, and the corpse was radioactive by law if not by fact. I went aboard anyway, before the burn order could process, because I wanted my tow fee and I wasn't going to get it without proving what state the hull was in. Del thought I was a fool for it. He was right, as it turned out, just not about the reason. The Scout was small enough to walk end to end in 10 minutes if the corridors hadn't buckled. A 2-crew survey vessel, not a warship, not a hauler, just a working boat that had been somewhere it shouldn't have and never come home from it. Frost had grown thick over every exposed surface. My suit lamp threw long shadows down a companionway where somebody had once painted a handprint in yellow beside the airlock, the kind of thing crews do to mark their own ship, and I remember thinking that whoever painted it hadn't known, that morning, that it would be the last cheerful thing anyone did aboard her. I found her in a maintenance locker aft of the Scout's crew berth, wedged in behind a coolant manifold with her knees against her chest, and for 3 full seconds I thought I was looking at a body, because nothing lives 11 years in a sealed Halvern derelict. Then she opened her eyes. Storm gray, the both of them, set wide in a face the color of wet slate, and she looked at me with the particular stillness of something that has learned not to make a sound when it's afraid. I did not reach for her. I've handled enough frightened things to know better. I crouched where I was, in the locker doorway, and I said something useless like, "I'm not going to hurt you," and she watched my mouth move like she was reading it rather than hearing it. There was a service log clipped to the locker wall behind her. Halvern script, a parent's hand, dates that ran 11 years back to a single entry, and then stopped. She hadn't been drifting alone that whole time. Somebody had sealed that locker with air scrubbing and a slow-cycle nutrient line rigged straight into the coolant system, keeping one small thing alive long after there was nobody left to check on her. I had maybe 40 minutes before the Corvessa Drift's own hold sensors would report an atmosphere change to the dock office and put a name on what I'd found. I used it. I logged a salvage biological welfare discovery under Corridor Health and Safety Accord Article 14, cross-reference to the Independent Salvors Discovery Statute, the provision that says a living find inside a towed derelict becomes the towing captain's provisional ward the moment it's logged, and that provisional ward status supersedes any standing incineration order on the vessel itself. I filed it at 09:16. The quarantine authority's automated burn notice hit my board at 09:51. 35 minutes. I've never been so glad to be a slow reader of my own regulations. Del wanted to know what in hell I thought I was doing. Tying our whole tow contract to a Halvern hull with a live passenger the authority was legally required to incinerate along with everything else aboard. I told him she wasn't cargo, she was a discovery, and discoveries get a hold period. He said the authority wasn't going to see the difference. He was righter than I wanted him to be. They sent one inspector, a heavy-set man named Orson Kell who'd clearly done this exact argument with exactly my kind of captain more times than he cared to count. And he stood in my cargo bay reading my filing off a slate with the patient contempt of a man watching someone try to talk their way out of a speeding ticket with maritime law. I gave her a socket wrench to hold, an old brass one, warm from sitting in my coat pocket, because her hands hadn't stopped moving since I'd carried her out of that locker and she needed something in them that wasn't air. She held it against her chest with both hands the whole time Kell and I argued, watching him the way she'd watched me, waiting to see which kind of man he was. Kell wasn't cruel about it. That was almost worse. He told me, reasonably, that the Halvern quarantine order didn't carve out exceptions for children, that my filing was going to get flagged for review regardless of how airtight the statute language was, and that the smart move, the only move, professionally speaking, was to let the burn proceed and let the review happen after, on a ship that wasn't mine, and a captain who wasn't standing in front of him. I told him the burn wasn't happening today. He asked me if I understood what I was putting on the line. I said I did. He asked to see her, and I let him, because refusing would only have told him I had something to hide instead of something to protect. He crouched the way I had, kept his hands where she could see them, and studied her the long, careful way a man studies something he's going to have to write a report about either way. She watched him back without flinching, the wrench still tight against her chest, and something in his face changed by a degree I couldn't have sworn to under oath. He didn't say it softened him. Men like Kel don't say things like that. But he spent longer filling out his own report than the regulations strictly required, and he flagged my filing for full review instead of summary denial, which in a man with his workload was as close to a kindness as the job allowed him to give. The hold ran 3 days. I kept her in the crew berth, fed her from the galley stores, learned that she flinched from sudden engine noise but not from me, not after the first night. She never told me her name, never spoke at all, that I heard, though once on the second night she reached out and set the brass wrench down on the console beside my hand, deliberate, like she was giving something back rather than putting it down, and then picked it back up an hour later like she'd only needed to know I'd let her. The review came through on the 4th day. It didn't go the way Kel had warned me it might. A Halvern resettlement liaison out of Vero Station confirmed the discovery, confirmed there was still a resettlement network for children found this way, and confirmed my provisional ward filing had, against every reasonable expectation, held. But the cost came with it anyway, the way costs do. The authorities' review flagged my handling of the derelict itself, the 40 minutes I'd spent aboard an unregistered Halvern hull before reporting it, the tow contract I'd falsified by 3 lines to buy that window. Salvage law doesn't forgive a captain who reads it selectively, even in a good cause. My license was suspended pending a hearing I already knew the shape of. Dell took his gear off the Corvette adrift 2 days later, not angry exactly, just done, a man who'd signed on to haul scrap, not to lose his own certification standing next to mine. I brought her up to the airlock myself for the handover. The liaison was a quiet woman with careful hands, and the child went to her without looking back at me, which I understood. She'd learned, 11 years in a locker and 4 days on my ship, not to look back at things she was leaving, because looking back never once brought them with her. At the hatch she stopped, turned, and set the brass wrench in my palm one last time, closing my fingers over it herself before she went through. I never got my ship back. The hearing went the way hearings like that go for men who bend the paperwork in front of witnesses. I run cargo out of Vero now on somebody else's manifest, somebody else's license, and I keep that wrench in my coat pocket still, warm from my own hand instead of hers. I think about the 11 years of a parent's slow-cycle nutrient line running into a coolant system, keeping one small thing breathing long after there was any reason left to hope somebody would come. Somebody did. It cost me the only thing I owned outright. I'd file the same 3 lines again tomorrow.